Choice FM is live at 5.
But it's like this, the South got something to say. That's all I got to say.
Reuben Blackwell and Express Yourself on Choice FM.
Hello, everyone. This is Reuben Blackwell, and we welcome you back for our weekly talk show, Express Yourself. So excited that I'm back talking with you again today. I hope you've had an excellent Memorial Day weekend holiday. Hope you had a chance to get a little rest, refresh yourself with good fellowship with family and friends. And of course, it's the first weekend of summer, so I hope you had a chance to grill out on your grill and then also take some time to honor the holiday, which Black people started in Charleston, South Carolina. So every time I think of Memorial Day, I think about the contributions that are always heralded that Black people make to America and to the world. And also pause for a moment to remember all of our family members who have passed before us, who have been veterans of the United States armed forces, whether it's Air Force, Navy, Army, Marines, Coast Guard, whatever division your family members or friends or yourself, if you're listening. Of course, we're not memorializing you. You're still alive. But for all those people who have served in the armed forces, and I'll say especially Black folks who went to fight wars for this country that never respected them fully, their bodies or their lives, but they took the sacrifice of their service and their outstanding service in their fighting of wars, foreign and domestic. If you're a veteran and you were protecting the nation on January 6th and you're still alive, we thank you. We'll remember you on Veterans Day, but you'll also go down in history when you transition from earth to heaven. This Memorial Day is dedicated to the memory of those people who served us well. So we'll move forward, and today I have a very special guest with me, a person who is near and dear to my heart, who has also done so much for North Carolina and for the nation, for Rocky Mount especially, in the area of community and economic development. Her name is Susan Perry Cole. She is a Rocky Mount treasure, a North Carolina treasure, a national treasure as far as I'm concerned, and so many others. Sue, we welcome you to Express Yourself. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Reuben, for the opportunity to talk with you today and to your listening audience. I consider it an honor. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And Sue is the president and CEO and a founder of the North Carolina Association of Community Development Corporations. And so thank you and welcome aboard. Sue, before we get going and talk about the number of things that we have to discuss, why don't you just give our audience a few minutes about who you are and where you come from and how you got to our beautiful state. Just take a few minutes. Let's talk about Sue Perry. She is so uncomfortable, y'all. She is one of the most humble people I have ever met in my life, who has lived such a phenomenal life of service and pushback and challenge to systems that have been unjust. So Sue, just give us a little snapshot into the life of who Susan Perry Cole is and how you got to our beautiful state.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. My life is quite simple. I have been a resident of Edgecombe County for 44 years. I moved here from Washington, D.C., and I formerly worked for Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm as her legislative staff director. And I had the opportunity to return to something that is near and dear to my heart, which is civil legal services, legal aid. They were about to start a new legal aid office here that would serve 6 counties, including Nash and Edgecombe. And I had the opportunity to apply for that position, and I did. And I stayed there for 13 years as director of what they called then East Carolina Legal Services, which is a part of Legal Aid of North Carolina. In 1993, I was tapped by then Governor Jim Hunt to be Assistant Secretary for Community Development in the North Carolina Department of Commerce. And I went there and I worked there for till 2000. And I came here to this organization the North Carolina Association of Community Development Corporations because I believe in people helping themselves to improve their communities. And I've been president and CEO of the NCACDC, believe it or not, for 24 years.
And that's incredible. And I just want to say, I just want to do a pause celebration moment. Sue Perry Cole ran the legislative office for an international icon, Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to ever run for president of the United States.
Mhm.
Earth shaker, world transformer, all her own, Susan. And she must have taught you the best of everything that she was because you came to North Carolina and have shaken it up. Thank you.
Well, I learned from her to stand up and speak out and to be a warrior woman.
Yes.
She was a warrior woman, and I was, you don't realize the opportunities when you have them sometimes. You're so young, but looking back, it was quite an opportunity to serve with the first Black woman elected to the United States House of Representatives,
Hmm.
and I appreciate that opportunity.
Wow, just phenomenal. And when you came to North Carolina, you brought with you a desire and a passion to serve communities. Tell us a little about what legal services is, what that entity represents, because a lot of times people hear the name and don't really grasp, the full breadth of the work that legal services is able to perform throughout the country, but especially here in North Carolina.
Well, what's called Legal Aid of North Carolina is a statewide nonprofit organization whose mission is to serve people who can't afford to hire a private attorney in civil legal matters. And I was with that organization for 13 years, and I have a great deal of respect for the advocacy that it brings to the table for people who don't have the resources to hire the best and the brightest, and to fulfill the promise of equal opportunity before the law for people who don't have the resources. And so we still have an ongoing relationship with that organization today. And they have a great deal of capacity. They're a statewide law firm with lawyers and paralegals, and they work diligently to provide resources, legal resources to those who can't afford to hire private attorneys.
And as such, in your advocacy and in your leadership with North Carolina Legal Aid or Legal Aid of North Carolina and serving as the director for the Eastern Carolina office, you had an opportunity to work with really frontline civil rights leaders in Rocky Mount for a number of years. Can
Yes.
you tell us a little about your work with Lewis Turner and Naomi Green, and what turned into really a revolution here in Rocky Mount, but also set the stage for a different way and a different way of thinking for the city of Rocky Mount that has really benefited in elevating the stature and the status of people of color.
Well, I have a great deal of respect for the now deceased Naomi Green and Lewis Turner. Miss Green was the lead plaintiff in 1983 in a federal lawsuit to challenge the method of electing the members of the Rocky Mount City Council. And we did that under the voting rights law to establish single member districts that were more conducive to the election of representatives of the choice, especially of the Black population in Rocky Mount. You know, Rocky Mount is 63% Black today, but at the time it had only one Black elected official on the city council. And for a period of time prior to the election of that Black city council person, it had a period of 70 years where it had none.
Hmm.
And so that was definitely not a fair system, and we challenged it under the voting rights law with under the leadership of Miss Naomi Green, who had run under the old system of at large with voting a residential requirement that you live in a ward, and she was not successful. So she was a prime candidate to challenge that system. And as a result of that, there were there's 7 members of the Rocky Mount City Council, as you know. And at the time, we were able to get 3 we were able to blacks to elect 3 out of the 7, and it was a period of time, almost 20 years, before the 4th ward could mature into a mixed ward and be able to elect that 4th representative. And so I'm very proud that I was at the helm when that lawsuit was filed, and I'm very proud to have worked with Lewis Turner and Naomi Green, who were grassroots leaders in their own right. Miss Green often would hand carry potential clients to our office in Wilson who had claims against the social services or other federally funded agencies for benefits abuses. And I respected that she went out of her way to make sure people had the means and the resources at their disposal to challenge abuses. And so that's something that I will always be proud of.
I never had the chance to meet Mrs. Green in person, but I tell you what, I have been a fan of hers, and from my perspective, just knowing the history and seeing how she advocated for poor people and for Black people and for women who had no voice in places of power. Were impacted by decisions. I just feel that she is Rocky Mount's Fannie Lou Hamer. And
She is, she was,
you
yes.
know, and her spirit, her presence, continues to live on. And of course, Lewis Turner, who is our beloved father in the civil rights ministry, and protector and encourager, motivator, and he would straighten you out if he felt you were not thinking in alignment with what was good for poor people and Black people in particular. They left their footprints and their marks in a very tangible way. And Sue, I just want to elevate and appreciate you as a person who the lead person. I know, because it takes a team, doesn't it, to get anything done.
Yes, and it takes grassroots leadership to bring these problems to the surface.
Yeah.
And I also can recall that Mr. Turner had the courage to make his voice heard in the city council chambers at
Yeah.
a time when that was not a thing that would happen on a regular basis. He would often protest different incidents of what he considered irregularities or abuses or signs of oppression. And he had the courage to stand up in the chambers and speak out. And I appreciate that, because it takes something to do that, especially for a grassroots leader.
And I want us to recognize, sometimes people just sort of think things that they enjoy today always were. And we look at city council meetings in Rocky Mount today, and we see the chamber, packed with people of all races and ages and perspectives, and that's a beautiful sight. But that was not always the case.
No.
People were not always welcome. It was never illegal for people to come, but it was not welcoming. And it was
It wasn't welcoming, in particular to the Blacks, and here they were the majority in the city, and they felt excluded. And that was by design, by the design of the system, the electoral machinery that was intentionally put in place and sustained that exclusion for a good little while. That was intentional, and they did not feel that their voices were desired or necessarily heard.
So when we hear and see, the vigorous advocacy that comes from people of all races and all perspectives, everything, Black people are not a monolith, and we don't think all
Right.
alike, and we don't all have the same perspective or even the same common feeling about what is fair, what's equitable, and what's needed. But when a Black person, a woman, is able to speak up, a person of color, in the city council chambers, we owe that to Naomi Green and Lewis
Yes,
Turner and
yes.
Spirit. And we owe it to you, Sue Perry Cole, for being the litigator, the person who was able to think through the strategy of advocacy and took advantage of the U.S. Constitution. In fact, you were
And a
part of
period of time when voting rights advocacy was being advanced in the state. We're in
yeah.
a different period now.
We're in a different period, and that's what I just want to shift a little bit because, you were and have been a leader both in voting rights advocacy in North Carolina and in Rocky Mount for certain, but also on the national scene. And you also have been a primary component and an early crafter of strategy for community economic development. Can you tell us the difference between what the industry might call economic development versus community economic development? Let's talk about that.
Community-based economic development has at the center of it that the beneficiaries of the services that the organizations provide are both the leaders and the beneficiaries of it. We have people who live in these neighborhoods and have been brought up in these communities, these oppressed or opportunity deprived communities, leading these efforts, who have invested themselves in acquiring professional degrees in masters in community economic development and training. And they lead these efforts to reverse the pattern of the loss of resources or the drainage of resources from these distressed communities. And they seek to reinvest or to attract resources and investment back into these communities. And they do so by partnering with banks and other financial institutions and so forth. And they can actually produce outcomes. They can construct housing, affordable housing. They can construct commercial development, and that is to their credit. And that is something that I'm very proud of being associated with as well.
Well, and that has really played out in a very positive way, I believe, for communities across our country and across our state. Can you tell us a little about the opportunity that was created with the Community Reinvestment Act?
Well, at one time, banks totally ignored their responsibilities to certain communities, these distressed communities in their service area. And the Community Reinvestment Act, back in the days in the 70s when it was first proposed, was just a couple of few sentences that reminded them that they had credit investment responsibilities to their total service area. And there was a wave of advocacy, and again, legal aid was a part of it, where teams of lawyers, and I was a part of that effort as well, brought this Community Reinvestment Act to their attention and challenged them to provide investment for these distressed communities or opportunity deprived communities. And as a result of that, new product lines such as affordable mortgages were developed, and branches were opened in certain communities that previously did not have access to banking financial opportunities. And so that was a great credit to the people who had the intelligence and insight to use this Community Reinvestment Act to create opportunities for financial institutions to better meet their credit access needs of these communities, because prior to that, there really wasn't a lot of attention to these kinds of communities. In fact, there was a period of effort to withdraw resources from these communities that started after World War II and so forth.
Well, again, going back to that comment that I made a little earlier, sometimes people see the situations that they're involved with or have grown up with and just think this is always the way that it's been, and there's no way it's going to change. But that's not true. History is very clear if we recall it correctly and tell the story about it accurately. that there have been a time when banks were very aggressively excluding people of color and Black people in particular from being able to obtain home mortgage loans, even though they had all the qualifying characteristics that others had. They were denied loans and they were only allowed to be given loans if they were purchasing or building homes in certain areas. And what do we call that today? What do we call
We
that?
call that redlining. And
Yeah,
that went on for a long period of time, and it contributed to the disparities or inequities we see among neighborhoods in a city like Rocky Mount, where there's a stark racial divide between neighborhoods. Certain neighborhoods have advanced and have thrived, and other neighborhoods have been deprived of investment and have not been able to advance. And so that's a period of racial discrimination, really. And it took people knocking on the doors of these banks to say, remember that there is such a thing called the Community Reinvestment Act. And so, not that the problem has been solved, it hasn't been solved. It's gone on for decades, this withdrawal of resources and so forth. But we're still advocating and still trying to advance and still trying to pull up our disinvested neighborhoods.
So does the Community Reinvestment Act still exist today?
Well,
And
it's been modified and there's been some new standards put into effect, which I can't speak to, but they
sure.
recently were enacted. But it has been modified and it still exists. But a lot of these products with affordable mortgages and down payment assistance and all of that may never have happened had it not been back in the late 70s and the 80s here in North Carolina. If advocates, both grassroots and legal aid advocates, had not brought this credit disparity, access to credit and financial product lines to the attention of these major banks in North Carolina.
And all of that stemmed from a push by Black people in particular of better access at the polls, better treatment, equitable treatment in the schools, and in every manner of public life. So, I don't want to minimize that having advocacy and vigorous pushback against systems that are unjust is very important. And things that happened 40, 50 years ago, we're still living under a level of access and opportunity that did not exist for hundreds of years, with a very brief period of enlightened time when the nation was engaged. We had a Supreme Court that was open to progress. We had a Supreme Court and inspired federal and local and state legislators and leaders who were pushing for a better type of society.
Right.
And we were able to create these gains that we have lived off of and normalize progress. But there is a different wind blowing today.
Yes, there's a wind of backlash
Yeah.
and trying to reverse some of these gains that have took struggle and blood, sweat, and tears. Everything from voting rights to many other rights that were a part of the struggle. And this has to do with the composition of the Supreme Court and the composition of our General Assemblies, which have shifted and have gone into a hardcore conservative posture. And the Supreme Court has the votes now after that the other side struggled for many decades to get control of the Supreme Court, to make decisions that can threaten and reverse gains previously made. They have basically gutted certain provisions of the Voting Rights Act, but it still is necessary to raise our voices and to protest and to sustain the push because the march to reverse these gains is very intentional and very deliberate, and it's nationwide.
It is nationwide. And what I hope our listeners are recognizing is that we can't take anything for granted.
No.
And we can't feel uncomfortable to push back is the only way we survive. It's the only way we survive, because we see that there are forces today that are very comfortable talking about, oh, diversity, equity, inclusion. Those are communist. Those are not American ideals. Well, I'm not sure what American is then.
Right. I mean, when you see that our General Assembly opened up scholarships for charter school parents that have no income limits to them, and it's talking about adding more money to that pot to increase the enrollment, or many of these parents already have children in charter schools.
Yeah.
But they
or private schools. They're not
Yes.
even charter schools that even
Yes.
have a semblance of opportunity for everyone to apply. We're talking about straight up segregated, rich private schools where people have all kinds of expendable income to spend on whatever they want to spend, but now they get to have public money so they don't have to pay for.
And I don't want to quote the number, but it was a huge number. I'm thinking right now that they are talking about something like 500 million, and in subsequent years, increasing that investment for no income limits on the parents who can, the families that can apply for these quote unquote scholarships. There used to be income limits or preference for those who were at the lower income ranks, but no longer.
No longer. And it's amazing to me that, folks feel so comfortable and privileged and to do that, but yet would not fund Leandro, which said intentionally that there have been, it's almost like redlining of educational systems that said that
underfunded, or the tax poor schools that have been challenging to bring up so that we have a unified, fair educational system in the state. But it's almost like the coin has been flipped. Everything that was progressive has become almost tainted and reinterpreted by those that are in the decision-making chairs right now, thanks to gerrymandering and other manipulations of electoral processes. And with this crowd that is in the majority on the Supreme Court, they have what they need to move forward and march, and they are marching.
They are marching. They're unafraid. They're unafraid
and unembarrassed.
And unembarrassed, and this is what it just sort of gets my goat. So maybe I'm a relic from another time, but I don't understand how people who are negatively impacted by public policy intentionally feel that they should just jump on the bandwagon to support people to destroy you and your own families, and malign folk who speak out as if, they're doing something or weird, because I'm always in that category.
I see that. I hear your voice on the city council speaking out for those that have less than or have been discriminated against, and I appreciate it enormously.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you are leading and supporting and advocating for what's good for all people. Because one thing about equality and equity, it benefits everyone, doesn't it?
Yes,
it doesn't leave anyone out.
Right. We're not trying to stop anybody from having access to the system. We just want to help those people who have been excluded and oppressed and marginalized to have an equal share of what is the American dream, or was the American dream.
Right. So let's talk about that. When we go on our second half of our program, it's amazing how quickly time flies when we are talking about good stuff. We're going to take a quick break and pay our bills for the show, and because we need Choice FM to be able to stay in business and keep bringing quality program to citizens in Rocky Mountain and Raleigh, the Triangle area. So we're going to take a quick break. This is Reuben Blackwell again with Sue Perry Cole, President CEO of the North Carolina Association of Community Development Corporations. We're having inspired and spirited conversation about things that you need to hear about. So I'm going to ask you to just hold on for a minute, let us pay some bills, and we'll be right back with you for more of Good Talk with Choice FM's weekly talk show, Expression.
Choice FM is live at 5.
But it's like this, the South got something to say. That's all I got to say.
Reuben Blackwell and Express Yourself on Choice FM.
And we're back. This is Reuben Blackwell again with Choice FM Wednesday talk show, Express Yourself. I'm Reuben Blackwell, and I'm with Sue Perry Cole. As I talked to you before, my dear friend who is a mentor, big sister in the faith. And Sue, we're part of a collaborative called Transforming Rocky Mount. And before we start talking about Transforming Rocky Mount, I just want to tell you, those of us who love this dear lady right here, we have tagged her with a moniker. She is our forever mother movement. So she is our mother movement because she's taught us how to think strategically and move the same way. Let's talk about we spent the first part of our show, Sue, talking about laws that we've been able to use for the benefit and the advantage of intentionally marginalized populations, and how Rocky Mount is really sort of a microcosm of what's taking place across the country. But let's talk about specifically some things that we've been able to work together for the last several years here in Rocky Mount, something called Transforming Rocky Mount, which you were there from the very beginning. Why don't we talk about a little about what Transforming Rocky Mount is and some of the projects that we've worked with. What do you think when you hear Transforming Rocky Mount? What do you think?
It's a multi-sector partnership or collaborative, which is designed to look at the people most impacted by health disparities and bring them into the process of accelerating changes to their conditions so that we can improve health outcomes. I don't know if our audience knows that Edgecombe County, which is a part of Rocky Mount, ranked 99th out of 100 counties on health outcomes. And so we're not in a very good posture with respect to health outcomes for our population. And we already talked about the decades of racial discriminations that have resulted in relegating Blacks into racial patterns of development that lock Blacks into inferior neighborhoods. And so when you live in a racially segregated community, that limits access to opportunities, and that especially negatively impacts residents' health and well-being. And so this collaborative or this partnership, which consists of the North Carolina Association of Community Development Corporation, OIC, and especially its Family Medical Center, and Legal Aid of North Carolina, and a group called the Community Academy, which is a group of self-identified Black residents of racially segregated and disinvested communities who have taken it upon themselves to improve health and housing outcomes and make a difference for their own communities, to speak out. And so we've been and by the way, research efforts have identified racial segregation as a social determinant or root cause of poor health outcomes. So this is a strategy that has a very strong foundation. But to reverse these patterns of development that have been going on for decades is more than a notion movement, and it's not going to happen overnight. But we've put our shoulder to the wheel. And one of the things that we believe in is that the people most impacted by the problems and disparate conditions facing Black residents or Black communities must be at the center of change efforts. And I've been pleased to be a part of trying to increase the voices of those that are most impacted by these disparate conditions by providing training and resident leadership and educational opportunities to help them to raise their voices and to help them to research solutions to their blighted communities' needs. So what we're trying to do is to increase the number and skills of residents impacted by housing and health disparities. Like I said, through training, education, leadership development, and power building sessions for these residents. And some of this work becomes quite technical. When you're trying to change something like access to affordable housing, you can run into the land development code, which has certain barriers and so forth. So we need to increase residents' expertise and build their participation, because often their voices have been locked out of spaces where policy decisions are made and resources are allocated. So we want to increase the voices of marginalized residents at these decision-making tables. And we've been at this for a while.
Yeah, and we can turn the clock back for a few years. When Rocky Mount City Council and our business community, work together. I want to make sure that we rehearse these histories so that we don't forget how we got to where we are today. We had a time when there was active and open communication between civil rights advocates that were publicly engaged in working to move our whole city forward, and business leaders who were trying to make money, operating for-profit entities in our community. And there was something that happened when Forbes magazine ranked communities across the nation. And there was a time when Forbes had ranked Rocky Mount as one of the poorest communities in America. And when that hit the public sector, boy, the business community quickly flexed, didn't they? Because they recognized that the disparities and the inequities that Black folk have been living with, since we got here, all of a sudden became a drag on their businesses. And it was always that way, but there was not public acknowledgement and recognition. And so when that happened, business leaders from the chamber sector and from the city council, and let me just break it down. It was Andre Knight, Reuben Blackwell, David Ferris. It was Mike Bryant with Southern Bank, and Robbie Davis, interestingly enough,
Interesting.
who was with Nash County. And we were meeting on a regular basis at Southern Bank headquarters, and we started talking about the need to really quantify where the areas of concern were. And we engaged collectively in the city of Rocky Mount, decided that we would take the lead in becoming the financial arm and the financial lead entity that would mobilize the region, and
Yeah.
brought Jim Johnson,
Yes.
Dr. Jim Johnson, who was a noted economist with UNC Chapel Hill, and he did a regional competitive analysis. And Sue, you were one of the co-leads that we selected to take our whole area through an examination of how we could not just acknowledge these trends, but what we could do to get ahead of them and to change and shift. Can you just talk a little bit
Well,
about
as
your
you've
activity?
alluded to, Reuben, at that time when the strategic visioning and planning process was
Right.
undertaken, the Rocky Mount area was leading the state on job loss. And
Yes.
so we had quite a challenge on our hands. It was double-digit unemployment rate at that time. And so there was a need to, because traditional economic drivers such as tobacco, textiles, and manufacturing had been eroded as there was a transition to a different kind of economic base in the state, one that exists today and is percolating along. And so there was an effort to look at how could we reinvent or restore the economic drivers of our economy to put it on a more positive track. And so that process went forward, and we had study circles, and the community was engaged and talking. And as a result of that, health was identified as one of the areas, and so were under-resourced neighborhoods identified as challenges, as a number of other challenges were identified. And so that gave rise to us understanding that there was an interrelationship among these different factors that produce economic deprivation, that so that we decided that we needed to kind of team up in a cross-sector way, and that gave rise eventually to transforming Rocky Mount in this cross-sector collaborative that has been working to create fundamental change and long-lasting progress, because we're trying to change systems. It's
Yes.
systems and institutions that keep the barriers erected that deprive us of opportunity. And we have to make these fundamental changes, and they're not easy to make, particularly in the housing area.
That's correct. You know, you kind of think about the fact that poverty is really a contrived system, and you don't change systems by, you know, one or two personalities that come in fiery or come in collaborative and
No.
might do good things or might not. But the only way you make societal change is in building and sustaining institutions. You've got
Right.
to have an institution in some way, shape, or form, Sue. Can you talk about what you've done and what you've seen our community do to take institutions and shift them to benefit other people?
Well, one thing that I want to give the city council credit for, and the community was definitely united in this effort, was to change the investment patterns, because for too long, public investment tended to go to one side of town, and there was an intentional effort made to reverse those public investment patterns and to put investment on the Edgecombe County side of Rocky Mount, and that culminated with the event center. And that was an effort that the citizens of these opportunity-deprived communities on the Edgecombe side of Rocky Mount were solidly behind the city council. And that was a $48 million investment. And that triggered an investment in downtown Rocky Mount. Now history is trying to be rewritten once again.
Yeah.
People don't want to credit the Black members of the city council for recognizing that there was value in the asset base of this deteriorated downtown and vacant and dilapidated downtown. It's become quite popular now to talk about downtown being restored and all of that. But that started with the Black members of the city council trying to look at how could they make a difference for the constituents that they represented, not 100%, but largely on the Edgecombe side of Rocky Mount. And I wanted to recognize that major investment triggered this current wave of hope and opportunity with downtown investment, that certain people have now jumped on the bandwagon and have forgotten who led that effort. But you asked me about the voices of those who had been excluded, and that has to do with low-income members of impacted communities, and that we recognize that they had the ability to make authentic demands based on their lived experiences, but they needed support and training. And so the Community Academy has been a hub of, or a center of leading this effort to improve affordable housing and health and neighborhood conditions in blighted and segregated communities experiencing disinvestment. And through the Community Academy, the Transforming Rocky Mount, and I'm glad to say the association is a
Yeah.
part of that, have supported grassroots-led civic participation and solution-oriented activities. And we deliver services through the Community Academy to increase resident-based expertise so that they can enhance the power, participation, and voices of marginalized residents. And as a result of these capacity building services, the goal is for low-income Black residents of Rocky Mount segregated and disinvested neighborhoods to acquire the skill, will, and opportunity to influence and engage on issues that matter to them. And that has to do with improving neighborhood conditions and improving access to affordable housing.
Well, I can think that's so eloquently stated. So, y'all see why she worked for Shirley Chisholm, don't you? You see, she's never lost that edge. I'm telling you. And I think about this, Sue, every time I'm in your presence. I don't, I know we're on a Zoom call, but I always know when I'm in your presence that greatness is all around me. And I'm just so thankful that you chose to live here, you and your beautiful family, and you've lived here and invested yourself. And I'm thinking of two particular initiatives that came from the Community Academy that dramatically changed the landscape of how we're operating. One was when the Community Academy came to the City Council and said, we need to spend specific energy and time, effort, and resources on looking at affordable housing opportunities in our communities. And you gave us a plan. That plan turned into, well, I'm going to let you talk about it. Talk about what
Well,
happened.
I'm proud to say that residents championed the creation of
Yeah.
a central table because back at the time that this proposal was first proposed, it was not a central clearing point for advocacy around affordable housing within the city of Rocky Mount. And so they came up with the idea that we should create something called the Workforce Housing Advisory Commission. And they brought that to the attention of the city council within the framework of fair housing. It was advocated for when there was a fair housing planning process going on. And so there was a structure there that guaranteed that the city council had to pay some attention to community generated input into the fair housing planning process. And through legal aid, which represents the steering committee of the Community Academy, they did written comments that said, we want to create something called the Workforce Housing Advisory Commission. And so they put that in writing, and community residents came and stood in front of the city council and said, please, can you move this recommendation along? And lo and behold, the resolution was approved by the city council, thanks to the unity of the Black elected officials, really, that championed that. And this Workforce Housing Advisory Commission was created, which was to advise the city on creating opportunities for fair and affordable housing, as well as when there was a challenge to the threat of gentrification, which is when new residents come in and replace lower income residents and create a change in the composition of some of these neighborhoods, which is something that could happen and is happening in the city of Rocky Mount because of its nearness and proximity to a fast-growing metropolitan area called Research Triangle in Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. So this is something that we've been paying attention to. And so we were able to create that. And that commission exists today as a result of the citizens making that recommendation.
And I can just say that the research that the Community Academy had conducted, the professional and very diverse appeal that came from the members of the workforce housing, or well, from the Community Academy that created and by the City Council, was received unanimously. We had engagement from all of the Black members of City Council, but it was such a wonderful idea that even conservative Republican white members said, well, this benefits everyone. And it's been operating very well from that time to this time.
Yes.
Also, every 10 years, following since Bible times, there's been a census taken. And every 10 years, at least in America, the clock stops and then there's a head count, of every household, every person, every household within our city and within our country, rather. And for governmental entities, every 10 years, we have to reset the boundaries of districts related to the population counts that exist. And so we have something called redistricting that occurs every 10 years. The Community Academy in our last redistricting effort was very influential in Rocky Mount in determining what the boundaries of the seven districts that we call wards in Rocky Mount exist. And while the city council had hired our own attorneys to take advantage of whatever the counts and the changes in our population, it was the community academy that submitted a plan really for the future. I want you to talk about that for a second too, because I want people to understand there is power in the people.
Yes.
There's power in the people. Come on, Sue.
The city council ultimately, as you said, approved a redistricting plan of redrawn ward lines presented by the community academy. The community generated ward map, which was introduced by the community academy with the support and assistance of the Coalition for Social Justice, a team of attorneys that specializes in this kind of thing. The community generated ward map introduced by the community academy created an Edgecombe only ward district, which was very important. We saw Black resident members of the community academy understood the value and importance of creation of an Edgecombe only district at this juncture in the city's transformation. As I told you, we're poised for having a major growth spurt because of our proximity to this fast-growing Research Triangle Park. But out of 7 ward districts comprising the city council, the community-generated ward map helped produce Black elected representatives in 5 wards, which was quite an achievement. So
It is, yeah. Go ahead.
now there's a supermajority on that city council, but that has its own dynamic going on now too.
It does. It does. And I think it's again, Rocky Mount is a microcosm of America. And so what we're finding, even with its generations change and become engaged, there is a difference in movement, and there's
Yes.
a difference in philosophy and thought. And what we endeavor to do, I won't spend time to malign anyone. What I will say here is that we've got to understand the connectivity of history, that you
Yes.
can't just deny history and think you just pop up on your own and something happened and the light shine on you, and then you're in a place where you're able to now make some good things happen or not. That's what's happening to Clarence Thomas. It's amazing to me, as a sitting Supreme Court justice who is a Black man, who was only the second Black man to sit there after Thurgood Marshall. If it were not for Thurgood Marshall, there would not be a Clarence Thomas. If it were not for a Brown versus Board of Education, if it were not for all of the advances in civil rights opportunities that opened up the door for all types of people of color, in particular Black people, and
Yes.
the opportunities for white women as well, that
Right.
happened through Black advancement and the insistence about civil rights. And now
Right.
you have a Black man who is now making public comments that perhaps Brown versus Board of Education was an overreach.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's
Amazing.
part of that backlash that we spoke about earlier, Reuben, that people have turned some of these victories on their heads and are now advocating an opposite position, saying that that the majority are victims of discrimination and that kind of thing. And that has to do with the composition of the Supreme Court.
Right. It does. It does. So while we are what we're saying, folks, is stay alert. Understand, don't ever minimize your need to participate in America, your need to vote, your need to register, your need to vote for your own interests, because other people are trying to keep you away from the vote. They're trying to dissuade you from supporting yourself, and they're trying to minimize and marginalize your impact and your effect. Sue, final words as we close out our hour together, and it's moved so quickly. Why don't we talk about an opportunity for the public to be engaged coming up to have a voice in comprehensive planning process in the city of Rocky Mount?
Yes, the comprehensive plan is a long-term planning process to establish a vision for the city's future, and that will identify goals, policies, and implementation strategies for achieving that vision. The comprehensive plan can and probably will address topics as land use, development patterns, transportation, downtown development, natural resources, housing, and public spaces. We're concerned that, and they say that the plan will be shaped by public input and identified shared community values. But many of our residents are not really attuned to what is happening. And we're in a period of public engagement now. And so on June the 5th at the Booker T Theater on Washington Street, we're going to have a session from 5:30 to 7:30, which Transforming Rocky Mountain is sponsoring. And we're bringing in the city officials to talk about what is comprehensive planning and how can the public become engaged in this public engagement component of the comprehensive plan. Now, when I say long-term vision, I'm talking 25 or 30 years. So this plan will not only affect us, it's going to affect our children. And it's going to set the stage for making decisions about land development code modifications and for capital improvement requests. So this is a very important planning process, and it's one that we haven't been involved in since 2003. And we need to add our voices and make sure that we say what we want to see in the city of Rocky Mount and in our own neighborhoods in terms of the future direction of the city's vision.
So we don't want to miss that event. If you're listening or you're looking at us on our Facebook, please bookmark this event. That's June the 5th. What
Yes.
time does it start?
5:30 to 7:30, and it's free.
5:30 to 7:30 p.m. No cover charge, just good information, opportunity for you to hear and then give input to understand about the process. It's at Booker T. Washington Theater on Thomas Street, right in downtown Rocky Mount on the historic Douglas Block, which is the only real living Black business district in North Carolina. It's amazing to me. It's the only, Rocky Mount has the only living, thriving, historic Black business district in our entire state.
So please come and please show up. Refreshments will be served.
Yes.
And you're going to have city officials to present. You're going to get it right from the horse's mouth. This is going to be presented by city officials. What is a comprehensive plan and what is public engagement? How can you and your family and friends become involved in influencing the direction through your own indication of what should be community values and the future vision for the city of Rocky Mount.
This is our chance, folks, again, to not just hear about history, but help shape the future and become great history ourselves. This is Reuben Blackwell. I've had an inspired, wonderful, fun-filled, informative time with Sue Perry Cole, my colleague, my mentor, and
Thank you for the opportunity, Reuben. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you, Choice FM, for hosting me and all of my good friends on this talk show, Express Yourself, on Wednesdays. And I tell you what, we've had such good information. Everybody listen, tell your friends, share it with everyone. Show up on June the 5th at Booker T downtown and come hear some good stuff and make a part, make a future, make a door open for what's yours and what's ahead of you. God bless you. Go ahead, Sue. Any last words before I close it?
See you on June the 5th.
Okay.
Booker T.
Booker T. Come meet the icon, Sue Perry Cole. Come meet the icon, Sue Perry Cole. And look forward to seeing everyone here. Thank you again. This is Reuben Blackwell signing out for this week's show, Express Yourself. Love you. God bless you. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful day and a wonderful day.
Choice FM is live at 5.
But it's like this, the South got something to say. That's all I got to say.
Reuben Blackwell and Express Yourself on Choice FM.